r/AskReddit. What was the most damaging thing a parent said to you when you were growing up? Not directly said to me, but being 13, coming home to my alcoholic mother's suicide note on the kitchen table, it essentially told my dad he should have married ex-woman who he cheated on her with years earlier, had some strange goodbyes and duck yous doled out in his direction. I had never run up that flight of stairs so fast, found her face down in bed, didn't think she was breathing, empty magnum bottles of wine strewn everywhere. After jostling her for a while she finally stirred and I knew she was alive. I told her unconscious drunk ass that I loved her to death and would be heartbroken if she did something stupid. I left, taking the note with me, never mentioned it to anyone in my family. My mom doesn't remember even writing it. Decades later, I still can't stomach the stench of cheap white wines, Rieslings, Chardonnays. Me and my little brother had been naughty, nothing special, just regular kids naughty. We had an older brother and sister. They were twins. Mum took us into the bedroom to punish us. We didn't plan to have you. You were accidents. We chose to have your older brother and sister. You were accidents. Me. About 8 or 9. That's terrible. You can't say that to kids. I will remember this when I grow up. My brother, 7, cries. Mum shuts up fast. 30 years later the subject came up and she denies it ever happened. Except my younger brother also still remembers it. Not me, but a friend of mine grew up with an alcoholic mother who changed boyfriends quite frequently. One boyfriend in particular started to rape my friend at the age of 9 years old when her mum was passed out. It went on for a couple of months before my friend finally told someone. The cops came around to arrest him. Her mum lost her shit and started yelling at the cops, demanding an explanation. One of the officers straight up said, because he rapes your child, that's why, in front of my friend. She then looked at her daughter, at her boyfriend and then back to the cop and asks, why can't you just take her? My mother locked me out of the house and told me to never come back after I told her boyfriend of a week to get away from my dog. Bastard kept hitting my dog, took my dog and fled to my dad's. I was 12 at the time. If it wasn't illegal you'd be spending the night with my buddies. At least then I'd be getting something, implying the money from pimping me out of raising you. I was 11. What a duck up they were. Don't believe that shit face. Then and now OKOP? Duck up is the best word for them. He was a narcissistic abusive a-hole who drank himself to death. When I was a kid my dad used to hit me. I had to help him with his work constantly, and when I did something wrong he would either mimic hitting and towering over me, and if he'd gotten angry enough, just hit me. Anyways, after a while I started flinching over every sudden movement he did near me, and sometimes it was so bad that I dropped something or literally injure myself by moving into something. He thought it was funny. He made jokes to other people about how you didn't have to even touch me to injure me. I'd do it to myself. I was just a kid back then. It took me a couple of years to realize how wrong the whole situation was. The reason why I flinched was because I was afraid there was a slap or a punch or even a kick coming my way. That was just the first thing of many that popped into my mind. What sucks is that I get these flashbacks of his actions and sayings sometimes. Some that my mind had suppressed, and they just make me so angry. Direct quote would be something like this: you don't even have to hit him. He'll injure himself. I was sexually abused by my older brother for several years as a child until he moved out and never told my family. I ended up actually forgetting it ever happened until 7th grade. I assume I repressed it. Well, I told a close friend and she took me to see a counselor who went to her church. Nothing ever happened with it. Fast forward to my sophomore year in high school. I was given 70 hours community service for truancy, and if you and a parent did this group therapy thing, it'd knock off 40 hours. The counselor who did it was the same counselor who I told about my brother, who, in turn, told my dad what happened. His response? That explains her grades. I cried about it for weeks. Edit. My mother was worse than my dad, and I want everyone to know I don't hold what my dad said against him. My mom is a shitty person in general who makes my distressed dad sound like parent of the year. When she found out, she cried for about 2 minutes, sucked it up, and then explained that her mother herself, and I all were sexually abused by a family member and that we got over it and so should you. This just didn't hurt my feelings much because she was always rude. Not something they said, more like didn't say. When I was 5 I was taken to the hospital for countless research sessions. Then afterwards I received pills that I needed to take every single morning before going to school. I never questioned any of this, but my parents never said anything about it for over 7 years. Turns out that I had been diagnosed with ADHD, and that I was being given Ritalin. I spent my entire childhood feeling weird and out of place among kids my age, since it was obvious that my behavior was entirely different from theirs, and everyone was able to do a lot of things I couldn't. Instead of sitting me down to explain the situation and explain that some kids are just different from others and that nothing's wrong with that, they simply watched and did nothing while I convinced myself that I'm a completely malfunctioning kid who will never fit in with anyone. I later found out I had ADHD, started doing research, stopped taking Ritalin and consciously changed my routines and social behavior so that I'd function better in school. I'm now 24, have a college degree, and have a job that I excel at. All this took was some documentation about how my brain works. My parents probably never told me anything about it because they didn't want me to feel like I was different, but the effect was exactly opposite to that intention. The day I started researching ADHD was the day I became a useful human being. Mom and dad are divorced. I live with mom. I'm 15. Mom decides to move 500 miles away. Dad, over about 6 months, repeatedly tells me that by law I'm old enough to make my own decision about whether to go with her or stay with him. Tells me I'm a man now, and he would respect my decision. Over and over and over. Agonizing decision. I decide to go with mom. Haven't told him yet. He calls me one day and says he needs my decision today. Picks me up and takes me to TCBY. In the car he tells me again to not be scared. Either decision is okay. I'm a man now, and he will respect the decision. In tears, I tell him I'm leaving. He immediately reaches in the backseat and hands me an envelope. I open it and it is a summons for me to appear in court the day before we leave. Had to get up in court to say I wanted to go with my mom. Luckily the judge thought this was ridiculous. Took me and my dad's lawyer to his chambers. Yelled at the lawyer. Called him a disgusting person. Kicked him out of the room. And asked me what I wanted to do. I said go with my mom. He said cool. Walked out. Left the next day. Have had a hard time making adult decisions since that day in the car. I'm 40. When I was in middle school, I was having a really dark time with my self-esteem. I told my dad that I felt like I wasn't good at anything, and that I was a loser. His response: don't say that, you have so many good qualities. For one thing you have really great, hygiene. 16 years later I still think about it. I told my mom I was depressed when I was 17. She told me getting over depression was easy because she got over her postpartum depression and that I shouldn't be weak like my uncle. That particular uncle committed suicide as a teenager. Overheard my mom say to my aunt that sometimes when she spanked me she didn't want to stop. Your stepmother is more important to me than you. 11 years old. It's nothing they actually said, but whenever I tried doing something new on my own that wasn't already expected of me, they just laughed it off. You want to exercise and eat healthy? Haha. Don't be silly. You are not fat. I was. And then they maybe mentioned it at a dinner with family friends for some more sensible chuckle. There were many other things like that, and while I'm sure they meant no harm, this caused me to do stuff on my own or do it when I was more mature and I didn't care as much what people thought about me. Now, since I stopped telling them things, my parents know very little about me and we have almost nothing to talk about. The only person with whom I can talk to more than few minutes is my sister since we never had this problem. My mom got really drunk on my 16th birthday, got really upset that no one was paying attention to her, and then started screaming at me and telling me she hated me. She tried to throw something at me but she was too drunk and missed. My mom told me a lot. Why are you so weird? Why can't you be normal? I was an introverted kid who was in pain from her alcoholic father being a dunt and making home life miserable. We lived too far for me to leave the house to visit the town center or any friends, so I was trapped in my own hell for years. Now I'm still weird. I have a chronic illness and am just an oddball. But I am at least happy. My mother regrets saying those things. She didn't know how hard it was on me. It was hard on her too. And I forgive her. She's grown a ton as a person, too. And I respect the hell out of her for all she's done for my sis and me. We're very close now. 3. Well, this is gonna be different. But they told me, constantly, that I was brilliant. Far smarter than everyone else and that I would do great things with my life. Not just my parents though. Every teacher, parent and other adult that came into contact with me. I'm not trying to whine about being encouraged. But when I was 13-14 years old and had been told these things for years and I really never did anything to deserve it, it just made me feel insanely bad for everyone else who struggled. And in extension ashamed of myself for not actually being as great as everyone told me I was. It ducked me up and made me not give a damn about what I actually did, which ended up being pretty much nothing. My brother ran away from our house just under a year ago after some fight with my parents. He was 19 and was quite shitty towards my parents by constantly stealing from them and saying particularly horrible things to my dad, who he didn't really get along with anyway. After all of that, he sent us messages about how we ruined his life and that we are all awful people. Even me. I didn't do anything. After an argument with my mother about getting okay grades for my AS levels, she said I was as bad as him. I told her to duck off, and the next day she apologized quite profusely. I didn't. After years of abuse from my mother, my dad finally divorced her, and in the years my sister and I lived with him afterwards, he often told us he wanted to kill himself, usually before he got drunk every night. This was high school. Edit. I read half of these and realized most people posting want to share their story because it's ducked up. We were treated terrible and as young people, definitely didn't deserve it. We are more than our past, so let's move forward from it and hold our head up. You won't become like them to your family later. Sister learned at a very young age that she could manipulate my parents into believing shit she did could be blamed on me. She got very good at it, and for years I got smacked around by my father. Had my mother use large wooden spoons to paddle me and all kinds of mental punishments. Years later my sister told my mother, acting so proud. Mother was shocked, saying that was wrong. But not apologizes, nothing, just moved on. Father didn't believe it even though it was her admitting it with no remorse. When he finally believed her, just looked at me and said, "You're well, it likely makes up for shit I never caught you doing." Really drove home that my family really didn't and never will give a damn about me. You're just like your father. Not a nice thing to say considering she divorced him and hated his guts, especially to an 11-year-old girl bawling in the bathroom. This is a standard of memories. On 9/11 it was a mess of a day and it got me emotional. I was around 11 at the time. My mom found me and asked me what was wrong. I told her I was crying about 9/11 and how sad it was. She told me to stop crying and grow up, and I was being selfish and didn't have any right to cry or feel sad. The other day she ridiculed me, calling me a child, for not calling her when I was going through some hard shit in my life. She was upset that I wouldn't confide in her when I was feeling weak and sad. Ha 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 ha. Duck-eying hilarious mom. I live in a very Catholic family in the South. I am bisexual and have been dealing with severe depression that was caused by repressing my sexuality, and hearing my family and community talk about how LGBT people should have no rights and that we are destroying America. About 3 months ago I worked up the courage to tell my mom about being bisexual. At this point I was suicidal and having urges to hurt myself. My mother's exact words to me were, "I can handle you being pregnant better than I can handle you being bisexual. I just think you should ask God for help and you are not to tell anyone else about this." I'm still dealing with depression, but I am now on medication and it is controlling the thoughts. When you're old enough and get the chance, move out to another part of the country. People like your mum, well, maybe she honestly believes it because of the values she's been taught, but still, you don't want to live with those close-minded people for any longer than necessary. Just my opinion. And duck that community in particular. You are what nature or God created, and that is wonderful. Love who you want, date who you want, and be around who you want. Hope you're getting better. My parents used to relentlessly mock me whenever I even mentioned a girl. And now I'm an adult and I still have problems admitting my feelings about girls, and I still don't open up to my parents about everything. The worst thing is my parents are funny, good people, so there was no one incident I could call them out on. It's just that every time a girl was even mentioned they would dial it up to 25. My mother doesn't have a censor. She just doesn't understand that describing murders and sexual assault to a child is harmful. I was 5, and she explained to me in detail the murder of James Bulger. Not simply that a little boy was killed by other kids, actually how they befriended him, mutilated and sexually assaulted him, and then smashed his head in with a brick. You'd think her psychotic stories would be limited to just my childhood, but no. She works in childcare. Probably that I'm ugly, constantly going on about my acne, how no one would want to marry me since I'm underweight, and how I'd never have a boyfriend and my brother would have a girlfriend because he is oh so good looking right in front of me. Hurts my ducking self-esteem. I can't decide between now that you are big enough you can speak with us, and you are worthless. I tried my best to raise you so you wouldn't be like your father. My father shot and killed himself and my brother, as well as shooting me and causing me to go blind. He was also expected to be a narcissist. Every teenager gets a talk from a parent. My overzealous, Bible-thumping fathers went something like this: you're going to have urges. And I can tell you this, masturbating is a sin and the Lord will punish you. And if you ever do anything more than hug a girl before you're married to her, you'll go to hell. It was an awesome one-sided conversation in a shitty mid-80s Subaru that he paid for later when I ended up in therapy. I was around 6 or 7. My mom had me vacuum the living room. This meant using hose attachments that I wasn't exactly used to messing around with and getting in the crevices of the sofa and in all the corners. I was trying to get the skinny attachment onto the hose, but the hose wasn't hooked up to the vacuum and I couldn't figure it out for the life of me. Usually my sister, 8 years older than me, did the vacuuming while we did chores, but she was away. My mom got angry watching me fail with the vacuum cleaner and she came to me, grabbed the hose, got about 3 inches from my face, looked me in the eye, and said, "I wish you were born retarded, and you couldn't feed yourself, and I'd only feed you when I felt like it, and if you die no one would give a duck." I don't even think I cried, but I never forgot it. I remember it like it was yesterday, and I'm pretty sure a part of me died that day, when she came and grabbed the hose attachment. I was so afraid she was going to beat me with it. I sort of wish she would have, instead. Based on the amount of posts here, this will most likely be buried. My mom, like the rest of my family, has severe depression. I've always known since I was young, but all I knew was that she had to take medication, and that she was sad sometimes. She would tell me what was wrong and I'd be there to cheer her up. I always felt like I was bearing the weight of all of her problems from the time I was old enough to understand them. Around 8 years old, I felt like it was my responsibility. We were always fairly poor. We never went hungry, but we also never had money. My mom was a single parent and worked her ass off to support us. And a few years later, my sister. When I started high school I moved to a new town because she had gotten a great job. She was making $40,000 a year Canadian. This was about 10 years ago now, and was in a serious relationship with a great guy who ran his own bricklaying business, and probably made about 60-80k a year. I didn't know at the time how much money we were making because it seemed like we were broke. The power got shut off now and then because they'd forget to pay the bills. Because of this I never asked for new clothes or anything really because I assumed we were still broke. Eventually her job got too stressful for her. She took some time off for sick leave. Around Christmas, her depression is always worse in the winter, especially Christmas. A couple days before Christmas we were told that she was sick and in the hospital for a few days. The day after Christmas we came downstairs and she was sitting on the couch with her wrists bandaged. She asked me and my sister what we got for Christmas. After we nervously answered she unwrapped her bandages, showed us her cut wrists and said, "This is what I got for Christmas." We were stunned and didn't know what to say. I think my sister was in grade 1 at the time. A month or 2 later she talks to us about what happened around Christmas with her, and she said that she had no memory of anything that happened for a full week, just before she took time off work, and until a few days after she got out of the hospital. She doesn't remember showing us or saying anything to us. or even doing it. All I know is I'll remember that forever. It's burned into my memory. I'm sure it's the same for my sister. I just posted this on someone else's comment, but now I'm emotional about it and I want it to be its own thing. My stepdad is the ducking worst human being on the face of the planet. I was the little red-headed stepchild growing up. The sorts of things he said to my sister, my brother, and I are awful and made us all feel like garbage. He valued appearance over all other things, which meant his 2 pretty daughters always got preferential treatment over us. Only 2 of you can go. 1 of you has to stay here. That doesn't sound like much, but it's what it did to us that damaged us the most. That was his rule for the 3 of us visiting with our father. The excuses for why one of us had to stay home varied and never held much weight, but we were young and we couldn't do anything. My dad never said anything to them about, which was worse. My mom stood by and agreed with him. It would have been okay if it worked on a rotation, but it didn't. What ended up happening was an alliance between my sister and brother, where they'd plan to go with my dad and make plans with him without telling me. They'd tell him that I was okay with it. I wouldn't know he was coming until he got there. My mom and stepdad never stopped this. They knew what was going on and they still let it happen. They wanted it to happen, because that meant they could drive a wedge between one of us and our dad. I still haven't forgiven any of them for that, and they know it. I still don't like getting close to my siblings, knowing that if something comes up that they'll take up sides with each other over me. I resent my dad for not saying anything about what was happening and trying harder to make sure all of us got to go with him. I got so upset once that I just burst into tears right there and told my father that I hated him. And when my stepdad and mom tried to comfort me, I told them that I hated them and their stupid rule. 2. I guess that was when they figured out that they were also ducking themselves over instead of just the relationship with dad and us kids, because they were a little more lenient after that. Still, it taught me a lot about everyone involved. Now I think everyone's plotting behind my back and that people who care about me are just doing it for show. Thanks, Mason. I hope you ducking rot. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.